Chapter 12. The next day, we had a funeral for Gene Dunt, my dad. I was barely able to keep my composure when I saw him put into the ground. However, Henry and our mom were crying uncontrollably. They barely managed to hold back tears long enough to give a speech about him. Hearing all the happy memories and good deeds my dad did made me finally start crying out loud. I was at least very thankful that everyone in the town had showed up to show support for my family. Almost everyone who showed up said some kind words about him too. Families would stand up in front of the crowd to give their speech about him. "I still can't believe he's gone," Henry said when he was alone with me. I could barely hear him through his sobbing. "Why are we living this nightmare?" I did not know how to respond to him. I just gave him a hug and cried with him. Elizabeth and Suzanne found us and tried to comfort us as best as they could. Shortly after they came by, Richard came too. "Does anyone want some fresh cold soda?" he asked. "I promise it's only soda and nothing else." He chuckled. "I would only bring the other stuff if we were partying." "Don't come here trying to make a joke out of this, Richard," Henry said angrily through his tears. Richard instantly dropped his grin and started frowning. For once, it actually looked like he felt bad after seeing how serious Henry was. "I'm sorry, Henry," Richard said. "I feel really bad about your father's death, but I'm not good at facing emotions like this. Making jokes is the only way I know how to make people feel better. That's why I didn't stand in front of everyone and give a speech." There was a moment of silence before Richard continued speaking. "I don't know how to cheer you up, but I do know that whoever the killer is, I will help as much as I can to make sure he is caught. There will be justice for your dad and the others who have died." We all nodded in agreement. After the funeral, Henry and I stayed in the house with our mom and looked at old photos of our family. We also stayed in the house all morning the day after the funeral. Henry and I wanted to spend the whole day together with our mom, but she had stated that she needed to go back to work. I was very upset that her job basically only gave her 2 days off after such a traumatic event, but she still got paid for the last week of her trip, so my mom seemed to accept the deal. Plus, she was not going to be traveling overseas for work, so she would be home at night. Once our mom went to work at 3, Henry and I went outside to sit on the porch. Soon after we did, Hector showed up. He wasted no time with telling us what he came over to talk to us about. "Hello, Thomas, Henry. I just found out that there was a murder in the city, but it wasn't in House 99. It was in 94. "Are you serious?" Henry asked in shock. "Did it happen the same night Thomas and the other two went to investigate it?" "Not sure when it happened. All I know is that this makes Thomas's theory of the killer's motive being related to the number 4 more valid. I just had a hunch to check that house out after I heard the theory and from what Charlie had found in that other house." "But why would someone call to tell you that the murder was in a different house?" "Could have been someone who was involved with the murder intentionally misleading us. That's what I would guess. Anyways, I need to let the mayor know to warn the residents who live in a house with the number 4. "The people in the city too?" "Yes, of course." "Is there anything we can do to help?" "Not that I can think of right now, but I'll let you know if there is." Henry and I watched Hector get into his car and drive towards the mayor's house. We spotted Suzanne and Elizabeth walking from around a house that Hector drove past. We focused our sights on them as they started walking towards us. They both waved, so we waved back. But from the corner of my eye, I also spotted Richard. He was sprinting towards me and Henry from the other street. Once he arrived, he looked towards Suzanne and Elizabeth. "Ha!" he yelled out. "I got here first." Neither Suzanne nor Elizabeth responded to him. "What's up, Richard?" Henry asked. "I've been trying to figure out how to crack this case," Richard replied, "and I told a friend of mine about the situation, and he said he might be able to help." I looked at him, slightly annoyed. "Richard," I started saying, "the last time you tried to have a friend help us, we got kidnapped. That situation was different. I didn't say anything to Jaqual before he offered the help, and I didn't know Jaqual for as long as this friend." "Okay, and who is this person?" "His name is Jeruthai. He wants me to meet him at the library. So it's a calm, public place, not ideal for kidnapping." I sighed and scratched my head. Suzanne and Elizabeth finally arrived on our porch. "Hey, babe," Suzanne said to me as she came to give me a kiss. Elizabeth did the same to Henry. "What brings you two over here?" I asked. "We just wanted to spend time with you and Henry," Elizabeth responded. Suzanne nodded. "So is that a no to the library?" Richard asked. "It's a no for me," Henry replied. "Whatever. You never want to do anything. I can count on Thomas to tag along." Richard looked at me. "Right, Thomas?" I sighed. "It's kind of a long walk," I stated to try to decline without saying no. "I know. That's why I'm having Isabella drive us there. So you being out of shape won't be a problem." I sighed again. I just wanted to be at home to relax and to feel better, but then I thought about the reason why I'm sad in the first place. I wanted to bring my dad's murderer to face justice. "Okay," I finally said. "I'll tag along." I stood up, and I'm not really that out of shape. Yeah, Richard replied. "Come on, let's go." Richard started heading down the street towards Isabella's house. I looked at Suzanne. "Do you want to come too?" "Of course I do." She grabbed my hand, and we started to follow Richard. I figured Elizabeth was gonna stay with Henry, so I didn't ask her to come. When we got to Isabella's house, she was already in her car waiting. We had a simple greeting with her, then went off to the library. It was a short distance away, about the same time it would take to get to Verona. When we arrived, Richard's friend Jeruthai was near the entrance, leaning against one of the pillars. Jeruthai looked kind of like Juthy. He had a light tan, stood about the same height, and even had a similar facial structure. I thought he could have been his brother. The only real difference I could see between them was their hair and eyes. Jeruthai had straight hair that was black and much longer than Juthy's. He also had more narrow eyes that were a darker color. These dark features were amplified by the dark clothes he wore: shoes, pants, shirt, and a jacket. The shirt was a dark maroon, while the pants and jacket were black. The shoes were half of each color. "What's up, JT?" Richard said to Jeruthai as he walked over to him. It must have been a nickname he had for him. "Hey," Jeruthai said back in a dull tone. "So, why did you want us to come to the library? There's some stories here that might explain why the killer is acting the way he is." "Like the Mr. Sketchy story?" "I don't know that story, but I was thinking it had to do with something from Japanese, and he might be taking a heavy inspiration from it. Follow me." Jeruthai walked inside, and the four of us hesitated before we did the same. Jeruthai brought us over to a computer and searched for bad luck numbers in Japan. A small article showed up that stated that 4 was an unlucky number in Japan due to it sounding like the word death. "I did not know that was a thing," I said. "The killer could be using this bad luck number as a way to justify who he kills," Isabella stated. "That, or the Mr. Sketchy story." "Do you think that story was made because of that unlucky number?" Richard asked. "Could be." "We should look for other Japanese stories that could have influenced the killer," Jeruthai stated. Drew and I went to the culture section of the library to start looking for Japanese books. That's when the librarian came by and said he overheard us talking about the bad luck number. He pointed us to a book that used that concept in a story about a killer. The book that he showed us was the Mr. Sketchy story. You said you remember reading this? I asked Richard. Yes, he answered. So you know what happens in the story? Yes. Richard started to explain a recap of the story. It's a story about a guy who goes by the name Mr. Sketchy, a faceless man who seems to be able to be in many places at once. After a storm happens, he starts attacking. For the next 4 days, he slowly drives to houses with the number 4 on them, and he kills the people who live in those houses. Or he hypnotizes every 4th person he sees, then kills them. 4 days after either attacking method, he restarts the process. His preferred method to kill is stabbing his victims, then using acid to melt their bodies. The worst time of day was 2 a.m. Mr. Sketchy becomes more aggressive. Anyone outside at these times were basically guaranteed dead. They state in the story how he was really hard to be caught due to him not being able to be identified. So that's the Mr. Sketchy story you all were referring to, Isabella stated. We all nodded. The way Richard described the story this time was more detailed than how he did it yesterday. I started skimming through the story to see what other information I could find about the Mr. Sketchy character, but I only saw details Richard already explained. Once I got towards the end, I noticed a few pages were ripped out. I hope there's no more important details we missed, I said. These last pages are missing. I wonder why those pages are missing, Isabella stated. Maybe the last person who read the book ripped them out. Maybe it was the killer, and he's using the pages to follow the book. Are there any other details you remember, Richard? Nope, Richard answered. I summed up everything I remember, minus a few minor details. I'm gonna go ask the librarian about this book to see what he might know. I quickly stood up and headed over to the desk. What can I do for you? The librarian asked while keeping his face behind his computer. I would like to know more details on this book, I responded. I can tell you lots about that book, or any book. After all, I am the librarian. I know. That's why I'm here to ask you about it. Well, that is a pretty recent book. The author actually is anonymous, but apparently he stated for it to be based on a true story. It's crazy. Are you able to tell me all the people who have checked the book out? What for? Well, there's kind of a bad situation going on. Not sure if you heard about it, but there's a killer on the loose, and knowing who had this book may help us catch whoever it is. The librarian waited to respond, but still didn't come from behind his computer. All right, I'll print out the list of people who borrowed this book, the librarian said, but it's not a long list. Thank you, I replied. If I'm being honest, I think I actually believe it's based on a true story. Why? Just because I have a torn piece of paper here of a town census or something that has the name of the killer in the book. The librarian reached into a drawer in his desk and grabbed the paper he was talking about. He then reached for the printer behind him without turning to face it. After grabbing the list of people who had gotten the Mr. Sketchy book, he handed me both pieces of paper. Now be gone. I have a lot of work to do. Hey, Thomas, Richard called out. Come check this out. I walked over to him and the others while folding the papers into my pocket. Drew, I found an article that seems to be related to the Mr. Sketchy story. I looked at the screen while Jerutha explained a brief summary of the article. This is a news article talking about a man who reported someone had been following him around. He never gave a description of what the man looked like, or as he stated, he couldn't remember what the man looked like, so everyone thought he was delusional or just lying. 4 days after the report, he was found dead. The time of death was around 2 a.m. The cops claimed it was a suicide because there was no evidence for anything else, just a gun next to the dead victim with his fingerprints on it. That's insane, I stated. That sounds similar to the Mr. Sketchy story. This was nearly 6 months ago, Ruth, I explained. That's before the book was in the library. But it's hard to believe a story could be published in 5 months, even if it is this short. We all stayed silent for a moment to think about all the information. The librarian told me the book was supposedly based on a true story, I stated, so I'm thinking that someone wrote the book as quickly as possible to capitalize on the recent story in the news article. The author probably thought he could get easy money from something in recent publicity, and from the fact that he wouldn't have to think too hard to make the book since the story is basically all right there. Then, like I said before, after reading that story, someone took an obsession over it. That sounds like it could be what happened, Isabella replied. Could be, Richard said. But there's other ways to look at it. I would say it's the most likely way, I said back, regardless of the order of events. If the killer sticks to these methods, we should be able to come up with a plan to catch him. We started to leave the library, and that's when I realized that I did not thank the librarian for helping us with our dire situation. I walked away from the others for a moment to find him. He was finally away from his laptop and was putting books on the shelves. Hey, sir, I called out to get his attention. He stopped what he was doing and turned to me. What can I do for you? He asked. His voice sounded more upbeat and higher pitched than from when I talked to him earlier. I just wanted to thank you for helping me and my friends out. He hesitated to respond, seemingly to remember what he had helped us with. Oh, you mean with the book? Pretty good story, right? Yeah, but like I said, it's been taken too far. How so? Remember what we discussed while you were at the computer? The librarian hesitated to respond again, but this time he took a longer time. I can't say I do. I was confused and scratched my head. Then I chuckled to myself. I realized he must have been so focused on his work on the computer that he barely paid attention to our conversation. Well, either way, thank you. I quickly ran to catch up with my friends.